Hi all, and welcome to this short tutorial on some essay planning advice in preparation for the progression exam which you're going to be sitting in September. Shouldn't take long really to offer you this advice and guidance, but this would then be used in conjunction with the essay planning that you are going to do yourself as part of your SIL. So obviously, essay planning for the progression exam is quite important. There are going to be a variety of different questions on the progression exam, so it is essential really that you plan for all eventualities and that you understand and appreciate how to approach the different styles of questions in psychology. So, first thing that we need to just clarify is what are the different styles of questions? So, some core information. So, in psychology, and I know this may not be the same for kind of some of your other subjects, but in psychology, we would expect students to be able to attempt four differing essay styles, two of which are 16 marks in value, two of which are 8 marks in value. So, we're going to consider the first two, which are the 16 mark questions initially. So all I've done here is I've given you a breakdown of what would be included or what would be expected for a 16 mark essay, which is without a stimulus, i.e. it's not attached to any additional information. So this style of question, I would argue, is probably one of the more straightforward questions that you could get in psychology. It's much easier than really difficult short answer application style questions. And while some of you probably won't like the idea of having to produce quite an extended piece of writing, because there are no specific requirements as such, it tends to be pretty straightforward. So these are the ones that I would recommend planning mostly for, but there are obviously three other styles of questions that you could get asked here. So the 16 mark essay, which is not attached to a stimulus, has got a really straightforward breakdown, which most of you should already be familiar with, which is 6 marks of AO1, which is your knowledge of a particular theory, factor, explanation, so on and so forth, and 10 marks worth of AO3, which is your discussion, or you might refer to that as evaluation material. So that's the breakdown of the marks. Now, what would we be expecting you to produce? For a 16 mark essay, you're probably going to have about 20 to 25 minutes to write one of these in full. Maximum of 25 minutes, really, based on everything else that's on the paper. So in 25 minutes, if you have been prepared enough and you've planned enough of these and done enough of them under timed conditions, you should be able to produce about 2.5 pages. Some students do nudge that up to 3 pages, sometimes a little bit more, but on average, we would be expecting most students to be somewhere within this kind of 2.5 pages limit. You may be slightly less than that given the style of your handwriting, but that's on average, I would argue. So how does that break down? And I think this is what some of you struggle with. Certainly my classes this year, I've had kind of topsy-turvy essays handed into me, whereby there's just simply too much AO1 and then really not enough of AO3. So there are almost twice as many marks attributed to discussion material. That therefore means that if we're going on a breakdown of between 2.5 to 3 pages, you should be doing approximately 1 page of AO1 or just short of 1 page of AO1, and then 2 pages, again, maybe just shy of that for some of you, for your AO3. So there should be a substantial increase in terms of the amount of evaluation material you are presenting in comparison to your description. And that AO3 really should be quite varied. So there should be a range of points which you are trying to include. So these shouldn't just be limited to, let's say, all strengths. It shouldn't also be limited to all supporting evidence or all just kind of research based. You should have a variety of different things in there. So strengths and weaknesses are an absolute must. You maybe want to get some contradictory evidence in there. Methodology is a good way to get extra credit. as long as you are applying your points, and that is certainly something that I've been very keen on with my own students this year, and I'm sure everybody else will have been as well, but you want to get a range of things in there. Now, you should, again, be aiming to do an average of 3 evaluation points, so 3 AO3 paragraphs. These should be in full IEC format, and for those of you at Bradford College, using the Peel format. But the point here is that if you want to get up into those top levels, so level 3, level 4 responses, your evaluation points have got to be clearly and coherently expressed. And I would always argue that the conclusion or the link back to your AO1 is what demonstrates your good understanding. Now, that's not to say that you can't get a good mark on a 16-mark essay if you don't include the full IEC. If you struggle with writing conclusions, you still can get a good mark on an essay. I've personally allocated, students at kind of 8-9 marks out of 16, which is not a bad mark for a 16-mark essay for those people who are unable to write conclusions, as long as you are trying to stretch yourself and give a breadth of evaluation points. Obviously, the conclusions and the links back are what then will build your marks up into the top of level 3 and possibly into level 4. So what we've got there is a bog standard description of what you would be expected to produce for a bog standard 16-mark essay which has not got a stimulus. So let's now then compare 16 marks without a stimulus to 16 mark with a stimulus, because you will see very quickly that the marks change. Okay, so what students really don't understand with a 16-mark applied essay is that it is not the AO1 actually that shifts in terms of the requirements. It is instead the evaluation credit that drops down. So the mark breakdown is as follows. There are still 6 marks of AO1 available here, followed by 4 marks now for application or AO2 credit, and then the AO3 drops from 10 down to 6. So a lot of my own students, both year 12 and year 13, do not recognise this shift in marks, and they think that because there's a stimulus there, that the knowledge part of their answer needs to be shorter, and that they're still trying to produce the same amount of discussion. That's technically not what the exam boards are looking for. So it should be a similar length to the standard essay, which we've talked about here. However, there is AO3, which is significantly reduced from 10 to 6 now, required on this style of question. You have to therefore produce the same amount of detail for your AO1. The most common problem here is that people scrimp on the AO1 and they cut that significantly back, and they end up losing a large proportion of their marks. There should be a detailed paragraph of AO2 or application, and the detailed paragraph of AO2 is usually, but not for all students, substituting 1 AO3 point. So you could possibly get away with on here going for a minimum of 2 discussion points. If you can stretch yourself and do a little bit more, then that's fabulous, but obviously you have substituted some of your AO3 marks here for the AO2, the application material that you've now included. So that's the core information, and we're going to just point out to you here, as I've already mentioned, how many minutes you would get to do this. Now, 25 minutes is the absolute maximum. But I would always say, as an essential point, that you would probably need to build in 2 or 3 minutes planning time. I would argue, as an examiner, that the best essays that I see in the exam series are the students who take a couple of minutes at the beginning of their essay to just make a little plan of what they're going to say and in what order. If you have done enough essay preparation prior to the exam, then that should just be a replica of the essays that you have been preparing for, okay? So always try and do a little plan before you launch into a 16-mark essay, because sometimes, and it has to be said, these 16-mark essays can turn a little bit kind of verbal diarrhea. So you lose focus on what you are saying essentially. So always plan in advance. So we're now just going to take a look at an exemplar, which you should hopefully be familiar with. You should have all filled this in, I would argue, on how to correctly structure your 16-mark questions. So the question that we're going to consider here is just discuss the behavioural approach, as it's really easy to kind of break it down as to what we would include. So, first things first is your AO1. Remember, there is no application in this particular question. It's just discuss, which is outline and evaluate. So, first things first, I would probably be expecting 2 or 3 paragraphs, really, depending on the theory or approach that you're describing, of AO1. And there's a little kind of format that you can maybe help yourself by remembering this in an exam situation. So, an outline of any kind of key assumptions or core principles at the start of a 16-mark essay is a good way to introduce ideas and your knowledge of key terms and or psychologists working in that area. Now, obviously, in psychology, we do not recommend writing an introduction as such, but most theories, approaches, explanations, factors that you will come across, all of them or most of them lend themselves to this kind of paragraph at the front of your essay, where you are just going into key assumptions. And then in the second paragraph, what you can do, or the following paragraphs, what you can do is you can build on the key concepts of the theory. Now, obviously, I blanked this answer out, so you can pause it and have a look at what kind of terms we would be using here. But this is a really important thing for you to understand, that the terminology that you use in these paragraphs of AO1 is absolutely crucial for you to get up into those top level answers. The other thing you can see here, that I would always recommend to my students, is to use examples. Examples are one of the best ways to demonstrate your understanding to an examiner, because more often than not, students will learn a whole host of terminology, but then they fail to follow it through with an example. And as an examiner, you're kind of sitting there thinking, has this student almost learnt this theory as a bit of a glossary, and do they actually not really understand the concepts that they are describing? So, just to refresh, bit of an introduction to the key assumptions or the principles, and then you want to follow up with 2, maybe 1 or 2 further paragraphs where you go into much more detail of the key concepts, and you want to absolutely jam it full of terminology, and examples are always a great idea. So that's our AO1 content. Our AO3 content, okay, remember we've said that it should be structured. So your discussion points should always be structured, either in the IEC format for Doncaster and Pontefract, or in the Peel format for Bradford. So we identify what the strength or weakness is. We then expand on this, all right? So this is our elaboration point here. Now, I've already referred to this a couple of moments ago, but it's worth pointing out as well, again here, that if you are aiming for an A or a B, then you really do need to try and work on learning those conclusions. Or what I would always say to my kind of year 13 students is, if you are genuinely an A or a B grade student, you shouldn't have to rote learn conclusions. They should come more naturally, because you've got a good understanding of the point that you've previously made up here, all right, so in your explanation. But if you are trying to aim for those top grades in psychology, then the conclusions are certainly a good way to access that. So we always want to remember that you're structuring your evaluation points. Now, the other thing to mention here is that there's got to be breadth or a range of points. So you should be trying to do strengths and weaknesses side by side. I would never really recommend doing a whole load of strengths, one after the other, and then a whole load of criticisms. The reason being is because this question is a discuss question. It's not an outline and evaluate question. So the word discuss implies that there's got to be some sort of kind of to-ing and fro-in. So one of the best suggestions that I can make to you here is that you should really try to go from strength to weakness and back again. Now, one of the good ways to practice doing this, and some of you are more familiar with this than others, I would argue, is potentially trying to do one of these double whopper paragraphs. I know a number of you are using this kind of burger bun idea to form your evaluation points. The double whopper, if you're not familiar, would be write in one evaluation point, so for example, a strength of an approach or an explanation, but then building within it a counter argument. Okay, now notice here that the bulk of this point, if you just read it to yourself, is a strength. However, we've got a contradiction which is built in to this evaluation point. Now, the contradiction that you include here doesn't necessarily need to be a fully expanded evaluation point in its own right. You're basically showing the examiner that you've got a knowledge of one point by then counterbalancing it with a secondary point. Now, I would argue, if you can just see here, that if you could manage to do just one double whopper, you really could stretch yourself out from 3 evaluation points up to 4, because you would be integrating 2 discussion points together. Now, that's not going to be for everyone. They are quite difficult to achieve, but if you do the planning that I am recommending that you do, you can give this a whirl and see how it sits with you. Is there any way for you to build this in to your essay? So that's how we would try to approach a 16-mark essay. We're now also just going to take a look at how we would plan an applied essay. So much of it is the same as what I've already said, but we want to see how we would bring in that AO2, that application stuff. So just going to read this question together because this is going to be one that you are going to mark, okay? So Teddy is discussing his girlfriend, Sasha. He says, we were in the same year at university, both studying marketing. She was really good at the theoretical side, and I was better when it came to practical work. We specialise in different areas now. I'm always proud to be seen out with Sasha. Other guys are really jealous when they see her. We tell each other everything, though, no secrets in our relationship. The question portion says, discuss factors affecting attraction in romantic relationships. Refer to Teddy's comments in your answer. So first thing that we just want to refresh or recall is what the breakdown of marks is here. And remember, we've said there is no reduction in the level of AO1 marks. So we want to be aiming for a page or just short of a page. You've now got 4 marks for AO2, apologies, that's just an error there. So 4 marks of AO2 application, and then 6 marks of AO3. Again, about the same as what you've done for your AO1. So that's dropped down from 10 to 6. So let's just break this question down of how you would do this. Now, you want to look out for specific indicators of what we call key directives in essay questions, such as this one says, you must talk about factors, okay? So it's a plural question, meaning that if you only discuss one factor, your answer would be capped at a maximum of 8 marks, okay? So it specifically states factors, meaning 2 or more must be discussed. So our options would be filter theory, physical attractiveness / matching hypothesis, and then we've also got self-disclosure, which we could include here. You want to aim to outline each factor, because we're going to aim to do 2. You could do 3 if you wanted to, in roughly half a page. Remember that you always want to use plenty of terminology. And remember, we're saying, please don't scrimp on the AO1. It should be as detailed as what it would be if you were writing a standard 16 marker. And I've already emphasised this to you, but examples are always a good way to demonstrate that understanding. So that's our AO1. Our AO2, which is our application marks, you've got two choices of how you can do this, and this would go for any application style essay that you might come across. You can either write a full paragraph at the end of your AO1, which I know a lot of my students would prefer to do, explaining how those factors relate to TEDI. Or if you're more comfortable with this concept, you can outline one factor and then refer to TEDI and then go off and do the second factor and go back to your application. It's whatever makes sense to you, okay? So that's our application. Remember, it's only for 4 marks, so you don't really need to go overboard there, but the application has got to be clear, okay, and focused. Now, remember that this question and the use of the word discuss within this question always requires evaluation. So don't ever go into a discuss question thinking it is just asking you for description and application. You only, however, need to include 2, 3 if you can stretch it out, evaluation points on this style of essay because there are only 3 marks per point available, giving you a total of 6 for AO3. So writing 2 would be a good kind of stand there. If you can stretch it out to 3, which I know a lot of you will do, then go for it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a go at marking one of these applied 16 mark style essays. I'm going to put a sample response on the screen for you now. And then we're going to take a look at the mark scheme. At that point, a link will show on the screen. It will take you to a Microsoft form, and you are going to answer 7 questions about this response based on what you think is good, what you think is bad, and then how many marks you would allocate it. So this is a response to the TEDI stimulus, which we've just seen there. So we're going to read it together, and then you will look at the mark scheme and you will complete the Microsoft form at the same time. So this is a sample response. So one factor affecting attraction in romantic relationships is physical attractiveness. It is important as we notice this feature as soon as we meet someone. Therefore, we make judgment if they are approachable from that point onwards. Some would define physical attractiveness by symmetrical faces. This would show a sign of fertility and health which men seek. Physical attractiveness also creates the halo effect, where we perceive attractive people differently as a whole person. Dion et al. Stated, what is beautiful is good. Lastly, the matching hypothesis states that we measure our own attractiveness and usually try to go for someone similar. Even if we are attracted to a more socially desirable person, we compromise and tend to go to someone on our own level of attractiveness as we fear being rejected. When TEDI states, other guys are really jealous when they see her and he is always proud to be seen out with Sasha, it implies that Sasha is really attractive and socially desirable, whilst TEDI may be less attractive as he is really proud. If we link to matching hypothesis and assume that TEDI is less attractive than Sasha, we can apply that TEDI was not afraid of being rejected and therefore sought a relationship with the more attractive Sasha than someone on his own level of attractiveness. There is supporting evidence for matching hypothesis. Mernstein asked participants to rate the attractiveness of people in photographs. Using the single blind technique, people did not know that some people in the photographs were married in real life. Comparing the ratings, people that were engaged had similar ratings to other photograph pairings. This demonstrates the physical attractiveness is based on both rating of attractiveness and similarity between the ratings. However, there is evidence that contradicts the matching hypothesis. Wolster et al. Carried out a study where students were told they had been matched with a similar partner, but they were actually randomly assigned a partner. Researchers found that even if the physical attractiveness was different, participants still arranged dates after the dance. This shows us that similarity and attainability are not the main factors affecting attraction, but the perceived social desirability of a potential partner. Filter theory is a theory which suggests that there are filters to narrow down our field of availables, aka potential partners. There are different types of filter to get a long-term relationship. The first filter is the social demography filter, which is factors that influence the partner's meeting. This can be based on geographical location, social class, level of education, ethnicity, religion, and more. You are very unlikely to have a long-term relationship with someone from the upper classes in America whilst you are a lower class in England. You are more likely to date people socially and culturally similar. This is known as homogamy. Next is a similarity in attitudes filter. This sees that if you share important beliefs and values and occurs within the first few dates, if you share values, there is a room for a deeper communication. Lastly, it is the complementarity of needs. This is when one partner has something that the other lacks. This adds depth to a relationship. Teddy says we were in the same year at university, both studying marketing, meaning that they are in the same location, same level of education, possibly the same social class, as they are both going to the same university. They both study marketing and there is no secrets in our relationship. Shows a similarity of attitudes as they both study marketing, which means it is something that they enjoy, and no secrets means they both value openness in the relationship. Lastly, there is complementarity of needs, as she is really good at the theoretical side and he was better at the practical work. This means that they can help one another out in their degree. There is research to support filter theory. Kirchhoff and David did a longitudinal study of couples in the US. They carried out questionnaires on the couples and found that if they were dating for less than 18 months, similarity of attitudes decreed how close they felt to each other, whilst if they were dating for more than 18 months, complementarity was more important to see how close they were. This increases the validity of the theory that shows different filters are prominent at different stages of the relationship. There is contradictory evidence. Anderson et al. Found that couples became more similar over time rather than complementing what the other lacks. This reduces the validity of filter theory as it contradicts the claim that complementarity is essential in long-term relationships. So you may just want to read that back to yourself. Obviously, you can pause and rewind this video yourself to make a judgment call, but here is the mark scheme that would go with that style of question. So we want to take a moment to obviously read through these mark bands really carefully and maybe reread the answer there, and then what is going to happen is a link will pop up hopefully now, and you are going to switch over to Microsoft Forms temporarily and you are going to hopefully peer mark that work. So you want to pause this here, complete that form, and then resume. Okay, so now that we've completed that little marking exercise for the 16 markers, we're just going to spend a brief amount of time now visiting the 8 mark questions. Now, the 8 mark questions is the same, which I don't think many of you will know this, that you can get an 8 mark question without a stimulus, which is really common, I would say, in a psychology paper. The less common question is an 8 mark one with a stimulus, which I don't think you will have seen many of. So let's just consider the left-hand side to begin with, 8 marks without a stimulus. So for 8 marks, you have got 3 marks of AO1 available and 5 marks of AO3. It is literally half of what you would produce for a standard 16-mark essay. However, we say that it is half of what we would expect, but that doesn't tend to be what you see students producing. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's because you don't feel that you can condense your materials down, but for most students, I would say one of the biggest errors that they make on a psychology paper is they do too much for these 8 mark questions. This should not be a case of you telling an examiner everything that you know. I often get year 13 students to look at their answer for an 8 marker and then compare it to what they would have said if it was worth 16 marks. And for so many students, they literally can't spot a difference because they've included absolutely everything that they would do. And obviously that's quite costly in exam. So it should be about half of what you would produce for 16 marks, so 1 to 1.5 pages. Your AO1 is about half of what you would normally do, so about 1/3 of a page or maybe just less than that. 2/3 to 1 page of AO3, therefore. And your AO3 should be restricted to 1 strength and 1 weakness in the first instance. I would say that I have marked a huge number of 8-mark essays previously who have only done one strength and one weakness, and because their AO1 is so concise, they go on to achieve full marks. So again, it's about reining yourself in here and really trying not to do too much and not thinking that you have to do much, because I promise you when examiners get hold of these, it really is just a waste of time. It won't even get looked at. We're just going to look at the bare minimum and see what you've produced there. So that's 8 marks without a stimulus. The harder style question is an 8-mark with a stimulus, and these could potentially catch people off guard if you're not used to them. So there are still 3 marks of AO1 available, so same as with the 16 markers. If you've got a question with and without a stimulus, the AO1 credit never ever changes. It is always the AO3 in the application that now changes the breakdown of the marks. So we've got 2 marks of AO2 and 3 marks of AO3. So the length should be exactly the same, 1 to 1.5 pages. Your AO1 should stay exactly the same, but now we've got the introduction of a short paragraph, so probably about 5 lines, maybe less for some of you with smaller writing, of AO2, just enough to pick up 2 marks, and then 1 discussion point. Your AO3 should be restricted to 1 strength or 1 weakness, or a burger paragraph if you can manage that. Now, the best way that I've found of getting this through to my year 13 students here of just how much you should be producing is to consider what 3 marks of AO1 or 3 marks of AO3 actually looks like. Please now just bear in mind how much you would produce for a short answer 3-mark question. That can be on any section, so research methods or any of the theory sections, but in your mind, looking back at previous answers that you've written, what does 3 marks of your work look like? Because that is all you should be producing on a 3-mark essay question where there's only 3 marks available to you. If you go beyond that, then you are really cutting yourself down in terms of losing time and credit elsewhere on the paper. So really do bear that in mind. Like I say, I said that to some of my year 13s this year, and I think it was a light bulb moment. It was the first time that they had actually realised what their 8-mark essays should actually look like. So try and do that now to help you and give you a bit of guidance of what we are expecting from you here. Now, the other thing that I would say, and I've already said that planning is really essential, but please don't forget to plan for 8 markers. They are the ones that students will mess up most frequently. That is without a shadow of a doubt. So if you go into an exam and you've never planned an 8-marker, then you are more likely to run the risk of making all those mistakes that I've just outlined. Do not be tempted to write everything that you know. It will cost you dearly, and you only have about 10 to 12 minutes to do one of these. So we're now just going to take a look at an exemplar, all right? But you are going to mark this exemplar, same as what you've just done for that previous 16 marker. So Claire can search through family photos on her laptop and listen to music at the same time. However, she finds it difficult to read her emails when talking to a friend on the phone. Discuss the working memory model, refer to why Claire is able to perform the first 2 tasks at the same time, but finds it difficult to perform the second 2 tasks at the same time, so for 8 marks. So if we recall, okay, the word discuss is present in this question, meaning that it needs you to describe and evaluate. So don't just be fooled into thinking that it's just describing and applying, okay? That word discuss means do both. Remember, your AO1 should not be restricted, so there should be a third of a page to explain the key concepts of the working memory model. Now, this is why some people will struggle here. You cannot say everything that you know here, so you cannot go into too much detail of all the different components. So try to think within this stimulus, which bits of the theory are being referred to. So I've highlighted some important aspects. Which bits of the theory do you think that you could possibly refer to in your paragraph, extended paragraph of 801? But you certainly cannot outline this full model. You just do not have the time to do it. Your application should be really short. So I've said about 5 lines, possibly less for some of you, to explain exactly why Claire is having the problems that she is. And this question is quite nice because it specifically tells you what it wants you to explain. So we've got a nice detailed paragraph of AO1, but not covering all of the working memory model, really focusing on the stuff that's referred to in the STEM. And then we want a short bit of AO2 referring to Claire. Finish up with one discussion point. Remember, there are only 3 marks available here. If you can manage a burger paragraph, brill, you might get a better chance of picking up the full AO3. But if you have done an evaluation point well in IEC or in Peel, then that would also be enough. So same as before, we've got an exemplar answer here, which you are going to look at the mark scheme for in a moment, and then the link will pop up and you're going to mark this on forms. So working memory model states that we are capable of dual coding, whereby we can process 2 different types of information at the same time. Dual coding works on the principle that we have separate slave systems that process verbal and visual information separately. These are known as the phonological loop, the PL, and the visuospatial sketchpad, the VSSP. The phonological loop processes speech-based information by converting sound to spoken language, whereas the VSSP processes shapes, colours, and distances. Both slaves work independently from one another. How, I think they're supposed to say, however, they both have limited storage. When 2 visual or audio tasks are presented at the same time, the capacity is exceeded and we are unable to do either task well. Dual coding could explain Claire's inability to look at her emails and talk to her friends at the same time. Both of these tasks involve processing verbal or speech-based information, which means the limited capacity of the phonological loop will be exceeded, and she can't complete either her emails or her conversation particularly well. However, Claire can look at photos and listen to music at the same time. One weakness of the working memory model is that a lot of research is based on case study data, such as the case of KF. Memory case studies often look at very unique cases of amnesia which cannot be replicated. For example, KF suffered damage only to his phonological loop due to a motorbike accident. Cases such as this cannot be replicated, so we struggle to test the theory for reliability. So if we just take a look at the mark scheme, remember your breakdown up here, 3 marks of AO1 available, 2 marks of AO2 and 3 marks of AO3. I would like you to read those bands carefully first and then hit the link which is going to appear now and complete the Microsoft form in terms of what you would give it. So pause this here and then come back. I've just got 1 more minute or so of material that I want to cover with you. So what now is you are going to take the lead on this and you are going to do some planning. So you have now got a list of 10 essays which you are going to plan. Some of those are 16 markers, some of them are 18 markers. So you're going to take a good look at your notes and you're going to make a plan of attack for how you would address those individual questions. You are then going to write a minimum of those 3 essays out under timed conditions. Now that bit is absolutely crucial. Now the fact that we're asking you to write these under time conditions really will prepare you better for your progression exams and the final exams. So that really is important. So what are we expecting you to cover? You've got to do at least 1 16 marker, at least 1 8 marker, and 1 applied essay. Now that can be either 8 or 16, that is your choice. So that's what we would like you to do next. Okay, so that shall take you, I'd say, quite a good amount of time, especially if you're doing the timed conditions prep. Now, just to finish off, I will tell you what marks those questions received. So the first question, which was discuss factors affecting attraction, which was applied to Teddy, it was a level 3 response. It was a very strong effort. So 10 marks is probably what I would give it. 11 people, some markers might stretch out to. The AO1 was definitely the strongest part of the answer, with really good reference to terminology and examples. The AO2 in the first paragraph was a little bit confusing. The reference to matching hypothesis for Teddy was really difficult to apply, as it actually goes against the idea that we are afraid of rejection. So it didn't quite work. It could have done, but it just needed to be phrased a little bit more clearly. However, this person redeemed themselves with the application of filter theory, because it was really well done and it was actually really detailed. The AO3 had a range of points, but the Mernstein study was not necessarily clearly concluded. It was not well described. I think there was a couple of errors in there. So it referred to them as married couples when they were engaged, and the findings weren't necessarily correct. The findings needed to be clearer, where it said ratings of attractiveness were more similar for engaged couples than people who were just set up for the purposes of the experiment. And the conclusion needed to refer to the fact that it implies that people of similar attractiveness levels are more likely to actually form a couple. But overall, a very, very strong response there. The second question, which you've just marked, discuss the working memory model, which was applied to Claire for 8, was also a level 3 response. It wasn't quite good enough to get up into level 4, so there are 6 marks probably available here. Again, the knowledge was probably the best part of the answer. It was accurate with really good use of terminology, and there was quite a concise description of dual processing. Obviously, it's difficult to do that in really, really short amount of words, but this person did try and do that in quite a concise manner. The AO2 was done well. However, I would say the last sentence could have been a little bit better explained, of why she can actually look at photos and listen to music. But that's just a slight criticism. And then the AO3 point is just a tiny bit superficial at the end. There was an attempt to apply the idea to KF, but it wasn't necessarily well concluded. So there was no reference to memory, which we would expect if you're making the link to the AO1, and they could have done a Berger paragraph. So they are the marks, and obviously that's quite important for you when you are self-assessing your own essays, all right, just to get a feel for where exemplars would have gone. So that should have been really, really helpful now to help you do your own essay preparation. So good luck with your planning, and obviously good luck for the progression exam. Okay.